Hey guys, welcome to the channel. Today we're going to be talking about neo-feudalism and how it could be re-entering our society. If you like this kind of content, you should definitely like, comment, subscribe, and check out our other videos on these kinds of subjects. You should definitely remember this is not financial advice. We don't accept liabilities for loss that you might incur, and everything here is strictly educational. Employers as landlords. How the housing crisis created this new dynamic. Well, considering that rent and owning a house is becoming extremely expensive and it's not considered viable to the world anymore, all those lovely employers and big corporations have stepped up to do something so nice for you. They're going to offer you a housing at fixed rent prices. Doesn't that sound nice? Well, let me explain why it's full of shit. Very important that I do that. There's a rent crisis. It's clear. People can't afford to rent and people can't afford to buy. So where does that leave people? It leaves them in a position looking for something to fix that problem. Now, the companies, the corporations have decided, oh, we'll just buy property and lease it to you. That sounds kind of nice, but here's the reason why it's not nice. It traps workers. So it traps them having to work for the company if they want a place to live now. So that's kind of sinister. That's not so friendly. You know, like if they really cared, they would have just paid you more so you could afford rent in that area. But that doesn't make sense. Why would they do that? It doesn't make fiscal sense. Because now workers have to fear for losing their house. So if they don't like the job and you don't provide good living conditions, there's not really much they could do. They become trapped. And, you know, like if you lose your job, you become homeless in that scenario, which is kind of scary considering that that's what they're pushing for. And you still have to pay rent. So in this scenario, the guy said, I was happy that the person was nice enough to leave me with, you know, a rent of only $1,500 a month. So now the company has not only gained money through buying the property and, you know, increasing the property value, but they're also renting it to you at just under market value so you could save a bit. But the reality is not only are they basically taking your money from you, you're not even getting ownership of anything. They're kind of fucking you because they could insure their house. They could insure those things. And the second you're gone, out the door, you're evicted. So that's kind of dark. It's very evil what they're doing, and they're trying to make it seem like the company cares about you, but they don't. Because if they cared about you, they would have just provided you more. But instead what they did was they took the thing that protects their liabilities, that gives them an asset, and forces you to pay rent. So let's say you make $4,000 a month, which is considered a good salary. That's very good. $1,000 a week is considered good, you know, like by middle class standards or people standards, right? Now $1,500 goes back into the company. So the company has basically taxed you for working for them by living in their accommodation. In my opinion, that's kind of like a bit of a cheap trick to get you to think that they care about you, but they don't. Because watch how quickly they'll evict you once you're, you know, out. That's kind of why I wanted to bring this up, is because this is neo-feudalism. You don't get ownership. And neo-feudalism, I don't know if you realized it, but it doesn't work out so well. Usually it results in, you know, declining conditions and, you know, revolutions and riots. And the last time there was neo-feudalism, one of the most recognizable times was in France, and it resulted in King Louis getting his head cut off because he was screwing everybody. I personally think that if we do shift back to neo-feudalism, expect a lot of turmoil on a political and human rights basis. Because if you think your landlord sucks now, imagine when the government and the corporations own the land that you're on, how much worse it's going to be. Way worse. Because guess what? You can't sue the government. And good luck suing a corporation because you don't got the money to, you know, go against their deep pockets. So the people that are out there complaining about their landlords, fine, he could be shitty. You could change your landlord. But your government or your corporation, not so simple. They're going to blow up the housing market so that way no one could afford it except for governments and corporations. And they'll make sure to crash everyone within that time too. And then that leads me to my next point, right? So like once they blow up the housing market and they crash everybody and everyone loses their money and then, you know, only the government and corporations could afford to buy, then they kind of trap you. And then they will buy all this property to protect the consumer from volatile housing. Well, that's a trap. Because once they buy it all and they own it, that's it. They own the land. We just went back in time. We have kings and royalty, and we're going into corporate communism. Because that's the next step. Because once they relinquish land rights, you're in communism again. And I don't know if you've looked at communism, but most people are terrified of it. And they flee it with fear, and rightfully so. in 99% of scenarios, with the 1% of scenarios throughout history being you can't leave the country without, valid reason. Wink, you know where that is. So definitely not something we would want. And this would be through the initiation of defaults and inflation. So the more defaults and inflation that would be associated with this, the more likely it is to happen this way. And like I said, once they abolish land rights and try to implement communist feudalism, it's going to become something really ugly. And that's why I'm very, very much against the idea of government rent to own. So the government in Canada wanted to establish a rent to own policy where it's like you could rent up to a certain point, and then one day if you're considered a good credit risk or not a credit risk, you could buy it. But if the rates keep rising and inflation keeps rising and you can't afford to pay your house, let's say after 3 years down the line, you lose everything you paid as well as whatever your down payment was. So then you get evicted, and then the government still keeps the land, but they've taken your rent for 3 years, and they couldn't really protect you because you couldn't pay the rent. So it's like rent to own is actually one of the most fucked up things that they've put forth, because it gives you the hope. It's like they're dangling a carrot in front of you, and they're like, come, you'll get your house, and then when you can't afford to pay, it's like, well, we're sorry, you paid up to this point, and that's not really going to help you much on your mortgage, so goodbye. Because that's where it's going to go. And then only government people will have a place to live. And then, people who have to slave for corporations. It's going to be difficult if that's the path that we decide to take, right? And that kind of goes back to the whole they want to go back to slavery via wage instead of change. So your chain will be your wage and your housing. And then, that's this whole push of the WEF, the New World Order of you will own nothing and be happy. Keep that in mind when you look at rent to own and, this new Neo-Feudalism thing coming out. And we're going to basically cut that video there because that makes me just stressed, and I don't want to be stressed for the rest of the day. If you like this content, hope you liked and commented and subscribe to us. Check out our stuff on Fiverr. We do personalized research reports and all our other social medias. Take care.